so far in this one. Let's move. Let's keep it in the SEC. Lots of crazy SEC games here. The Georgia Bulldogs get right after losing their first game in 4 years. They bounce back and they get a win over Auburn in kind of a sleepy game. This was a very hot day in Athens, and it seemed like a lot of the fans seemed to think that too because they ended up leaving around the fourth quarter. And it was also another slow start for the Dogs. I was kind of expecting this team to really come out strong, and they only lead 7-3 at the end of the first quarter. It was 14-3 at halftime, and Auburn ends up scoring with Jarquez Hunter to cut this lead to 14-10, and that's where you really saw Georgia kind of start leaning into this game, and that's maybe just the identity of this Georgia team. I mean, maybe they're a kind of team that needs a little time to ramp up a little bit and lean on their opponent. That's just kind of their identity as of right now. But I did find a positive with the rushing attack. The rushing attack did start finding its legs a little bit. Trevor Etienne scores twice. He rushes for 88 yards, and Carson Beck looked steady. Just your typical quarterback under center. He's 23-29, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns. Nothing sexy about this game, really. But I was expecting Georgia to come out and kind of lean into it a little bit better. And they stretched out the scoreline a little bit at the end of this game, specifically in that fourth quarter. But I don't know. I just kind of a sleepy game just in general.
Yeah, I mean, two things jump out at me. And look, you better hope it's not what you said, where that's what they need and they start to lean on their opponent, all that crap, because that's not how you win national championships. Kirby wanted this team to get off to a fast start. They did not get off to a fast start. Auburn has been liable to turn the ball over all season long. Guess what they didn't do? Force a single turnover. They have got to get better in those two areas specifically for this to be a Georgia team that can find their peak. They have got to force turnovers. They created a little bit of pressure. They got 3 sacks, but they have got to do more to get turnovers, and they have got to start faster. Those are the big-time plays, the impact defensive moments that are going to impact these games. I'm comfortable with what Georgia did offensively. Defensively, not quite as much, but they do still have to start faster. It's especially frustrating when it's now become a talking point. It's now become a trend. Kirby Smart in the interview with, the quick 45-second blurb right before the game starts says, we want to get off to a fast start, and it doesn't happen. That's a problem. And so they've still got a lot of things to figure out and to get right. It's a comfortable win. You're okay with the win. But look, this is still a game that was 7-3 until a couple of seconds before halftime. They have got to find a way to separate from their opponents.
Yeah, and I think there's too much explosion available on this offense for them to be this lackluster in that regard. Right. I mean, there's too much potential here, and I think this team just has, of all of the top teams right now, I think Georgia has the most room to improve. And to some extent, that should scare a lot of people in college football. Just because this team has a lot of room in that avenue. And I think once you get some guys back on that offensive line and some of these other dudes on the outside, like specifically Arian Smith, who has dropped a lot of passes here over the last last 2 weeks. I think that they can get better. I think Carson Beck is only going to improve as the season goes on. And Trevor Etienne, I mean, like once he starts rolling a little bit more on a consistent basis, then I think this offense is going to get better. But I think you also mentioned something that was a little concerning here. I understand Jarquez Hunter is hard to bring down, but there were a lot of instances where Auburn would take a play and it would be a tackle for a loss, or maybe it would be a 1 or 2 yard gain. And then that would turn and stretch into 4 or 5 yards. They'd get a couple extra yards here and there. And that may not matter in the micro always, but over the course of a game, that extends drives. That keeps your defense out on the field. It beats you up a little bit, just a little bit more. And it seemed to happen a lot in this game. And it's not just in this game. We saw that happen against Alabama, where Jalen Milroe would get to the outside, and Jalen Milroe would take a 3-4 yard play where he's just going to the sideline, and then he finds that edge and he cuts up the field. Or something like that. It just takes 5 yards and turns into 8, 9, 10. Now, Peyton Thorne is not Jalen Milroe. That's very clear. But he did have a couple scampers where he was able to extend drives and start stressing the Georgia defense a little bit more than he probably should have. And that is a concern for this team right now. They aren't tackling at a high level, which is very obscure and strange for a Kirby Smart defense. But I do think that they have room to improve there. That's something that's going to get better, I think, as the season goes on. So that's why I say that. I mean, Georgia's, you look down this schedule too, you have to be better in those areas. You have Mississippi State coming up next, but then it's Texas. You got Ole Miss later on this in the schedule. You have a wounded animal in Tennessee. Like, look, there are games here. Haynes King caused you a lot of problems last year. This is a team that needs to be better. They just need to be more sound and fundamentally strong. And they're dropping passes. They're missing assignments and little things like that, which is just not typical for a Kirby Smart team. But then let's flip it over to the Auburn side. Are we sure that Hugh Freeze is the guy? I'm still in. I'm still on board with Hugh Freeze, right? He's lost, I think now 6 games in a row to Power 4 opponents. That's not great, and for a guy who's kind of dropping bombs on his players and blaming them, and that he averages 2 turnovers per game over his 82 games, but it's his players' fault that they turned the ball over. I don't know. I just maybe I'm just kind of sour with Hugh Freeze.
I think you have this discussion with any coach that struggles after taking a high-profile program. He did not recruit Peyton Thorne or whoever else they had at quarterback.
He did recruit Peyton Thorne.
Did he?
Peyton Thorne was a transfer portal addition.
Okay, well, I mean, he hadn't been given a chance to develop.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
He's got not a 5-star. He's got the number 2 ranked dual threat quarterback coming into the program. I think you have to give it an opportunity to work in a couple more of his players. That being so, I'm not going to be too critical right now. That being said, like, to answer your question, no. Like, I if I was an Auburn fan, I wouldn't be confident that he's like on the way to rebuilding the program in this new SEC, where you're going to have to face a couple of different and newer teams, sometimes tougher teams, but you also may get to face some of the weaker teams more often as well. No, I wouldn't say I'm overly confident, but I do think he deserves the benefit of getting a lot more of his players into the program.
He does, and he will, and I'm going to give him that time.
Yeah.
But Auburn has continued to struggle, and they're losing games that they shouldn't be losing this year. I fully expected them to be a potential 7-8 win team this year, and it's just been anything but. They've dropped games, and I felt like I never really felt like they had an opportunity to win this game. Really win this game. I thought that they had a chance to make it a better game. And then you have Peyton Thorne who misreads an RPO or an option type of situation where he could have handed the ball off and he was probably supposed to, but then he keeps the ball and is tackled for a loss. I mean, you're down 14-10 at that point, and then if you extend the drive there, that was basically all she wrote for Auburn at that point. But I mean, I know, like, did you ever really think that Auburn had a chance to win this game at any point?
No.
See, I didn't either. When I was reading up on this game, and I always read recaps, I read them in probably 100 different places after these games. It's just something I do. And then I watch the game myself, obviously. But a lot of them started talking as if like this was like some sort of an upset bid that Georgia took away. I just didn't see it that way. I didn't really see it that way. And Auburn has just been a bit of a disappointment throughout the course of this season.
Well, it's an upset bid in terms of, I mean, like I said, you scored with like a minute before halftime. It was 7-3 and anything can happen at that point. But I mean, once it got to 14-3, it felt safe. Yeah.
Well, they've lost now 3 games in a row. They got to get back on the right track, but they get the week off and then they get up to Missouri, a road trip there. And then it's Kentucky, Vanderbilt, which has shown that they're not any kind of a slouch. I'm looking at this team and I'm struggling to think of them as a bowl team. That's more what I was talking about with the Hugh Freeze commentary. You probably should have beaten Cal. You didn't do it. You probably should have beaten Arkansas. You didn't do it. You probably should have beaten Oklahoma and you didn't do it. Now the schedule gets tough and it's starting to become a little bit more important than ever to get a positive result. But they have the bye week this week. Couldn't have come at a better time. They can hit the reset button. They can settle in a little bit.